everyone's panel on 50 years of Gamera vs. Zigra. I am your co-host, Kent, and with me is your other co-host.
What up? I'm Jason.
We're going to be celebrating the 50th anniversary of Gamera vs. Zigra. No production notes or any behind-the-scenes stuff unless we need it for context within our discussion. We've talked about this film before. Go seek out the previous episodes. And also, there are just better resources out there if you really want to get in-depth into the production history of this movie. What we're here to do is to acknowledge and celebrate this particular film, which, hard to believe, is celebrating 50 years. Jason, you want to start us off here on 50 years of Gamera versus Zigra?
Yeah, with Gamera vs. Zigra, I think this was a film that we've seen, or at least I've seen, I think a couple years after, maybe 1 or 2 years after getting introduced to the Gamera franchise back in the late 90s and early 2000s there. And when it comes to this movie, I was sort of intrigued by the look of Zigra. It's one of the more unique kaiju's out there in a way. It's like a space shark, literally. A literal space shark.
The space shark.
But when it comes to this movie, I mean, if you've seen all the Gamera movies after, I would say, Gamera versus Gauss, you kind of know what you're getting yourself into, just pure entertainment, fun, but, with the movie just being made specifically towards kids around this time, especially, in 1971 when most of the adults are just watching stuff on TV during this time
MacGyver.
and just sending their kids to the movie theaters.
I know MacGyver
and
came like a
stuff.
decade and a half later. People relax.
But yeah, it's if you want something as a guilty pleasure, just turn your brain off for, I would say, an hour and a half. There, I think this is definitely the movie that you would want to watch. And one of the more unfortunate things about this movie that shortly after it was made, uh, the production studio, Dai, unfortunately went bankrupt in that regard, which is, sad in that way. But they're, still around today with, Katakawa being bought by them and stuff. And yeah, but with this movie, it's just, just pure, yeah, it's just a pure entertainment type of movie. And it's just a really cheesy movie. It's just something like you would get from the Yongari movie back in the late '60s there, but I would say more entertainment wise than
Really?
the Yongari one. Yeah.
Oh, fighting words. Okay. Well, I see you and I are going to see differently on this. I think this, so far out of our anniversary panels that we've had during this Daikaiju Fest, I think this is going to be the one in which we're going to have a wider differentiation. By and large, I think we basically agreed on just about everything up to this point. The movie's fine. I will say that. I like you. I do love the look of Zigra. The fact that it's a space shark. He's very super intelligent. The problem is with this film, there are many problems, but the overall problem, the one major problem with this film was its budget. It's roughly the equivalent of $97,000 today, and as most of that's pretty low. Even by 1971 standards, when $97,000 could go even further than what it can today. So that's the biggest problem. And as a result, this movie had, you can tell by the way Zigra talks at times and just sort of how the story unfolds, that there were bigger ambitions for this film, but they cannot fulfill them because of that limited budget. In fact, there's this one thing that many fans are still discussing even today, and even I'm still fucking confused over, is that somehow these kids come across this guy near the ocean. He's eating seaweed, and he says it's the year 1980, and the kids believe that they have been transported into the future. Many fans, myself included, are like, wait a minute, was there some sort of time traveling, or is this guy just friggin' nuts? And I think the underlying consensus is that the guy's friggin' nuts, because if it was 1980, I think the movie and the people behind the production of it would have tried to change at least some things within the space-time continuum and the parents of the kids and all this stuff. None of that happens. So then what does that guy have to do with the film? Absolutely nothing. And so like that's just
Well,
the thing of this film. I disagree with you in that this film is more entertaining than Yongari. Yongari is not that much better in terms of production. I will say though it's slightly better in its production, but I do think it's much more entertaining. But one of the things too about this film for me personally that I'm disappointed in is just the battles with Gamera. The initial underwater battle is pretty cool because that's Zigra's natural element. But then anytime you get on land, it's very boring. And yes, I understand Zigra is supposed to represent like a fish or a shark out of water. He's going to be more vulnerable. He's just not going to be able to fight as well. I get that. But even then, when they go back to the water, stuff just isn't quite as exciting as I would hope. And the movie is definitely geared towards children. Um, there are some things I really like about it in a very cheesy B movie type of way. I do have a bit of nostalgia for it because this film I saw, I think, first time like in the late 90s. And so this isn't one of my favorites. And of course, I think I'm in line with much of the fandom, at least here in the States, where when you talk about the Showa Gamera era, kind of once you get to this film and Super Monster, this is kind of where, no pun intended, they jump the shark. And it, and again, a lot of that is just because Dai was having troubles and the money just wasn't there. About 9 years later, they try to revive their studio with Super Monster. That didn't work. And as a result, Zigra and Super Monster come out looking really bad because of that.
well, I think you're a little bit too critical along with the fans there, and I would have to disagree with you on that. Even though that you know the movie only costed $97,000, I still think they pulled it off pretty darn well and sort of made it on par with the other Showa Gamer movies
Hmm.
in between. I would say Gamer versus Gauss and this one here, and I mean I'm not sure how much the budget was for Super Monster Gamer, but I would say with this one was far
And it
superior.
shows.
This one is far
No, I'm not
superior.
defending Super Monster.
But
I am not defending that.
and then I would say I'm not sure how much of a budget that Yongari had, even though it's in a different currency. But I don't know as far as the was it the converting rate during that time period. I still think that Zigra was still on par as far as production wise with Yongari there. And as far as that whole little controversy that you mentioned about with the time travel thing, I don't know if that was part of the actual script from the Japanese language, or if it was just the dubbing part where they sort of maybe misunderstood or something of the sort. I would have to go back and check as far as both the dub and the original language in it. But I mean, just with you know with the budget that they had and production, even just before Dai went bankrupt, I still think that they really pulled it off pretty well. And just with even though that's pretty cheesy and everything, I still think they they did pretty good with what they had.
I find the film to be overly boring. And again, I think again it's just the consequence of a severely limited budget. Um, I'm not a fan of the kids in this film. The parents are okay, but they play even more stupid than what we've gotten in previous films. Again, though, I understand that that's just part of when you get purely children's films, that the parents are kind of, you know, less intelligent than they really are. Although, who knows, considering
Well,
what we've seen in today's world, that
well, for
there are a
me,
lot of dumb adults out there. But
well, for me,
um,
when it comes to the kids part, I think the kids in this one are far better than the ones that were in the Jiger movie.
Initially when I first saw Jiger, I hated those kids. Now I've grown to like them. I mean, they're not great. They're not the best kid actors you're going to find at a kaiju film, but I think they're much more tolerable than what you get here. Because you got one of them, the little boy who's addicted to Coke, the soda, by the way. I want to make that clear. He's addicted. He's addicted to soda. I just want to make that clear. But at the same
Coca
time, though,
Cola.
too,
So,
one of my I will say this, outside the Zigra design and some of the initial underwater battles, um, the one thing that I like about this film, and it's unintentionally funny within the English dub, is how they figure out to get people out from under Zigra's control, and it's going ah 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 like the one dad is speaking into a
I would, I
walkie-talkie and
would
he's
say, I would
like it's
say,
unintentionally funny.
I would say in that sequence, I would say that's probably out of the entirety of that film. That would be the uh, one critical thing that I have is just that it just
One,
seems well one of the things, but it just felt forced in a way that they
it's
did it.
terrible. I mean, it's unintentionally funny. But you mean to tell me though too that we're gonna fight now, everybody? You mean to tell me um, that there's a long sequence of the gal chasing these kids like around SeaWorld. And
And
it
that
goes
too,
on
yeah.
and it's very slow. She comes off looking buffoonish as well. You mean to tell me that that's entertaining?
Well, I was just sort of agreeing with you. I mean, there's going to be some things within this movie that I uh not really a huge fan of, but as far as the overall part of the film, with the kaiju fights and everything, and just being for what it is with the cheesiness of it, it's pretty entertaining. But there are going to be some parts within it that I just not really a huge fan of, especially with that awkward, yelling into the radio thing to break people out of the control of Zigra, and then as far as the gal trying to go after the kids and everything. But yeah, there's gonna be few things here and there. I'm not, you
I
know,
mean, I'm not trying to say
I'm
you're
not.
an idiot.
I'm
If you
just,
like it, more
and then,
power to you. But I just find this
but
film to be boring.
but I'm not saying that. I'm not 100%, saying that. Oh, it's the best film ever. I mean, a lot of films are gonna have some things I'm not a huge fan of.
Yeah, and I mean, look, here's the thing. I mean, we've kind of crapped on a couple of films over the course of this Daikaiju Fest. Unless Jason puts this one in front of those two, then spoiler alert, there's at least two films that we're going to crap on. Um, I mean, look, I don't hate this movie. I find it to be dull. And there's some things I can appreciate about it. I've talked about a couple things. One thing I actually forgot to compliment this film on is the beginning of this film, where they're on the moon and you have like the moon base there. You have some really cool miniatures and the Skittles looking Zigra ship coming in and doing its thing. It's a very good looking set. I mean, for the limited budget and all that, I mean, that set comes off pretty cool. The film, sadly, by and large, is a giant SeaWorld ad that I find to be rather dull, except in a couple of sequences. And This film, I will watch every once in a while because it is slightly intriguing. I am, depending upon the film and how it's executed, I am occasionally intrigued by crappy films. Like if you've ever heard and seen of Robot Monster, um, that film is incredibly crappy, but yet at the same time, I'm very intrigued by it. I've seen it several times, and I'm like, this is so stupid, but yet I can't look away. Um, this film occasionally piques my interest and curiosity at that level. It's not as bad as Super Monster. Super Monster, even though, and I think I've said this before on the podcast occasionally, Super Monster, weirdly enough, has slightly, ever so slightly, grown on me over the years. Um, it's starting. That film is starting to kind of turn into that type of film too, where it's so bad that I'm curious and interested in it. It's hard for me to look away. Um, but at the same time, that film is pretty damn terrible. Um, if you gave me, you're like, here, you're stuck on an island. You can only watch one film. Do you want Super Monster? Do you want Zigra? And I'd be like, well, the only good thing about Super Monster is I get to see clips of Gamera fighting other monsters from previous films. But overall, that film's pretty bad. I'm going to go with Zigra. I'd rather have some unintentional laughs with, ah, ah, like, a guy like he's getting anally probed or something, than, to watch a film where like 85% of it is just almost unwatchable. And, like I said, my biggest issue with this film has more with the fact that even with what they had and with what they could do with very limited amount of cash and just in general of what they could do, they made a film that, for the most part, was dull. However, I will say, I'm not gonna lie, you know, the gal being in a bikini earlier in the film, but by and large, um, the film is rather dull, and they could have written the film in a way to where it could have been more interesting. They were at SeaWorld, they were talking about dolphins and echolocation. There was a dolphin die-off part of the story that was mentioned earlier in the film. Why not explore more of that, and talk more? It wouldn't have cost you much because you're already partially filming at that SeaWorld. So there could have been things that they should have rethought and rewritten that still would have made it more interesting. Because, like I said earlier, there are some schlocky films that are pretty damn entertaining. And yeah, they look terrible, but you buy into it because everybody else who made the film bought into it. So it just, to me, the problem outside of the budget itself is just the decisions in writing and what they were wanting to do. Because as a result, what we get is one of the things we get is this overly long chasing, quote unquote, of this woman X, Madam X, whatever you want to call her, chasing these kids in a very slow, buffoonish, laughable way across SeaWorld. That to me is nothing more than, again, a giant ad for SeaWorld. Like, hey, look at this. Look at our inside aquarium. Now look at the atrium over here. Now look at this. Look at that. And that to me is what it was. It was, again, a movie more about showing off SeaWorld than it was anything else. And as a result, the story decisions suffer, and you get a rather dull film as a result, in my opinion.
Uh, for me, when it comes to the story, yeah, I think they could have at least improved in some areas, and then as far as the cast, we do get at least a couple of familiar actors in this one, such as Koji Fujiyama, who plays as Dr. Tom Wallace, which he played as Onodera in Gamera vs. Baruga, which we talked about, or we're going to be discussing about, whichever order this panel comes in. But
I
with that.
forget to the guy who takes care of the dolphins. I forget the character's name and also the actor's name, but the actor who plays the dolphin caretaker was the reporter that gets eaten by Gauss in Gamma versus Gauss.
Yeah, I'm not quite certain here. I know I've got the list, but I haven't. I'm not going to bother taking the time to check here right now. But with him, and then and I think one other familiar actor that's in this movie. When it comes to the script, of course they they at least have to work with what they got. Um, I would say they could have been a little bit better, but I think they still did a pretty decent job with what they had. But yeah, um, I would think I I think that the script could have been a little bit better, but for me, when it comes to this movie, it's just I just really like with how they set up as far as the monster bouts and everything there. But
Shin Minatsu is the actor's name. He was also in Gamera versus Barugon.
the human elements, I think, did a pretty decent job as far as mending in with the kaiju sequences. But yeah, they could have done a little bit better as far as the human element side of the stories, especially with some, try to, you know, do things a little bit better and try not to make unintended hilarity in some areas. The one that Kent kind of makes fun of there, and then maybe shorten up the chase scene there. But I mean, when it comes to those sort of things, I've seen a lot of the tokusatsu TV shows from that time period, and with a lot of those TV shows, probably with the probably the same budget or maybe a little bit more than that per episode. I mean, they still sort of do some of the same things, and like what I was, been watching Jumbo Gaze here recently, and you see some areas where they're at amusement parks or regular parks and stuff, and yeah, it's sort of kind of maybe advertising a little bit of those areas, but it's also due to budget constraints and stuff. With the $97,000 budget, I mean, they probably didn't have time to, or obviously the money to build other necessary sets. Probably the one of the most expensive ones that they probably have done for this movie was the Zigra, the interior of the Zigra spaceship. But so it's just due to budget constraints. So you may think that it could be an advertisement to SeaWorld and so on and so forth, but it could. I would say it's more or less just kind of sticking with the theme of what the movie is geared towards. I mean, you got a space shark, for that matter, so have some sort of kind of a sea or ocean theme. So you got SeaWorld there, and with the budget that they had, and so it's just more to me. It's just budget constraints when it comes to that point. But I would say, yeah, they could have done a little bit better with the script, but I think they still did at least a decent job with what they had. But could have been a
Mm-hmm.
bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of get kind of where you are. And again, look, um, as I've said before many times on our podcast, I am a huge defender of the 67 Yongari, but I understand it is a pretty crappy film in many respects too, because when we talked about that film, like maybe 7, 8 years ago, whenever it was, I pointed out a lot of bad things and even made fun of it. It's a guilty pleasure of mine. And, I get where I understand what you're saying. It's hard for me to just see what you're seeing. And again, a lot of that is just because we're different people and
Because
we
you're
just,
blind.
probably, We probably quit being a sheep.
No, you quit being a
We just
sheep.
probably saw it under circumstances that just maybe for you were more favorable than they were for me. But even then, it's just like, okay, I've seen this movie, gosh, maybe a dozen and a half times since, the late 90s. And even then, typically, if I don't like a movie on its first watching, if I watch it more, it usually will tend to get better. There have been some exceptions to that, and this movie has been one of them. I never really hated it or thought it was terrible, but like I said, I find it to be dull. There's just a few things about it are kind of neat in terms of execution. I think the Zigra suit, the initial underwater battle is pretty cool. The moon effects are really cool. Everything else is either in the realm of it's suitable, it does what it's supposed to just nah, and it's and I hate to say that. I mean, a lot of people probably think, look, you enjoy crapping on a movie like Shin Godzilla. And it's like, actually, I don't, because the Godzilla character and Kaiju Eiga in general are like one of my most favorite things ever. I own all these movies. I own of English texts, books on some of this stuff, and I love learning about this stuff. I love these characters. Yeah, I'm always going to have, like everyone else, some films I like a bit more than others, but I don't like to like shit on a film or anything like that. But there were things within Shin Godzilla, and you can go back and listen to that episode almost 5 years ago and hear my thoughts on that. But there were just a lot of things that, not just in terms of execution and decision making, that I thought were bad. It's just representation of that character and that story that viscerally made me angry as well. I felt like I'm all for change and making things different because that's how characters like your superheroes and your Godzillas and your James Bonds survive over the decades. You just got to do something different. That one I thought went
Yeah,
way too
just
far. Here with Gamera versus Zigra, um, again, it's just dull. And I've always said, one of the things I've repeatedly said on our podcast is that one of the worst offenses a movie can do is to not be entertaining. And I like Robot Monster. I brought that up earlier in this discussion. The film, in many respects, is very terrible, but it's entertaining. And part of the reason why it's entertaining is because it's so bad. Here, the movie is pretty bad, but it's not entertaining. Yongari, again, guilty pleasure. The movie's so bad, it's good for me. It's just, it depends on how you write it and how you execute it. And I think there are some people, like the people who wrote and put together a movie like Robot Monster, knew what they were getting into and went with it. And as a result, you come out with a product that, yeah, is absolutely awful, but it's entertaining because everybody bought into it, versus something like Gamma versus Zigra, where Daiei, despite the incredibly low budget, expecting to make something in the realms of like their better Gamera films, like a Gamera versus Gauss or a Baragon, even though, yes, it didn't have the budget, but I think that's how they approached it. And as a result, not buying into the fact of like, oh crap, we virtually have no money. Let's just kind of make something schlocky. It's going to seem whiplash inducing, but maybe if we do this correctly, we can make something that at least, people will still on some level find entertaining. And that's not how they did it. And the result, again, in my opinion, is a very doldrum film.
well, I think you're wrong.
Well, I think you're wrong. You have a right
But
to your own opinion, even if it's wrong.
same to you. So, with that, is there anything else that you want to add to this before closing out?
I would just, and again, I doubt this will ever happen, but I would love to just see sort of a remake of sorts of this film down the road with a better budget and all that. I think the potential for the Zigra character is there. I think part of it was realized here, but other than that, I think it faltered. And again, it just lack of budget. And I think also on some level, just a lack of imagination. I still think even with the kind of budget they had, like I talked about earlier, they had SeaWorld behind them and all that. They still could have rewritten things to still make it mildly entertaining at least, and they just decided not to. I think a better writing team and a better budget, I think you could have a better realization of this character, which I think has been definitely long overdue. I mean, 5 decades and that's it. Like,
Well, it would be nice if they if Dai or Katakawa Dai started, trying to get reintroduce Gamera to the world. Sort of
there
like they
just
did.
isn't the popular or the not the
Well,
popularity, but the interest, though.
well, they tried doing that with the concept trailer a
Right.
few years ago, but then you never really heard much of it again. But if they did try to reintroduce Gamera again, yeah, they can probably try to reintroduce some of these uh, existing monsters that are a part of the Gamera franchise, and that would be sort of neat and kind of make
No more Gauss, though, please.
re-envisioning of it. Yeah, yeah, I think Gauss has been overused quite a bit, mainly due to the Heisei series of Gamera. But yeah, with that, I just think due to the budget constraints and everything, I think they just didn't have a whole lot. As far as when it comes to locations or sets and everything, and also I think I'm not sure if this was the case too, that they probably some of the people that are behind it and everything, they just try to just at least make an entertaining Gamera movie, and then they might have had some inkling from the higher ups that there's probably things going on behind the scenes there at Dai. I'm assuming that could have been the case, but yeah, I think it's just sort of kind of along the lines of what they have always been doing with Gamer films, and I don't think there wasn't a whole lot going on except for the inevitable demise of Dai at the time there. Um, but yeah, in my opinion, I think it's still a pretty good movie. I would say just a little above average. It's not a really great film. It's a decent film for me. Yeah, there's gonna be some quirky cheesiness to it. I mean, that's always going to be the case with these kinds of movies, especially with them being made geared towards kids and everything during that time span. But if you just, literally just turn your brain off, unlike Kent here, I
I
think.
can turn my brain off, but as I've stated before, my suspension of disbelief can only go so far. But again, my problem is not the suspension of disbelief. My problem is that I'm just bored, and that's the movie's fault. If a movie can't entertain me, that's the movie's fault. And I love schlocky films. I mean, I talked about Robot Monster, I talked about Yongari. I have a full collection of schlocky, like B sci-fi classic horror films. I mean, I've been made fun of at various points in my life for, someone who has like no taste or whatever. And I go along with a lot of things. It's just that, again, as a movie, if you can't pull me in somehow, then that's your fault.
But with the story being at least decent, could have been a little bit better. But obviously, it's a lot of it has to do with the budget. I'm not going to explain everything again. The cast is pretty good. The practical effects and the kaiju designs are pretty good. Uh, kaiju sequences are good. And then lastly, the human elements are pretty good. Could have been a little bit better. And as far as a rating for me, anyways, out of 10, I would at least give this one a 7 out of 10.
I had a feeling that's kind of where you were going. I'm giving this one. I'm giving it a 3. It's
Wow.
fairly low for me. I will give it props in a few areas. I'm giving it sort of a gimme for an extra half to 1 star. But yeah, I mean, I've said my piece. You guys know where I stand on it. I just find it disappointing that this is kind of what we get out of an amazing character like Zigra. But like I said, at times it's unintentionally funny, and I get some decent chuckles at least out of those moments. But this isn't a movie that I watch all that frequently. It's one of my least watched kaiju films. It's in that bin.
Well, I think that about does it.
And so for that, thank you for watching our Daikaiju Fest panel on 50 years of Gamera versus Zigra. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you continue to enjoy 2021's Daikaiju Fest.
And we'll see you in the next one.